This is program number 10 in the Accelerated NLP training series. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us. We're going to talk about strategies in this program. We'll begin to look at how strategies work inside the individual for producing behavior. And of course, that's what we're primarily interested in this case, is the way strategies actually will produce a certain behavior. Okay, so let's look. Page 53. The theory is that a certain syntax, a specific syntax of internal and external human experience consistently produces a specific outcome. Now, our personal experience as human beings is an endless series of representations, both internal and external. In order to take this endless sequence of internal and external representations, it's useful, I think, to suspend the process and then to contextualize it in terms of outcomes. So some of the things we do in strategies is we discover them, and the first thing we'll do is discover the person's strategy through the process of elicitation. Then we'll utilize the strategy by feeding it back to the person in the order and sequence that it was elicited. Then we actually may change and design, be able to change, make changes in the strategy, and actually design a strategy so that it produces the desired outcome. And then we'll install a new strategy if needed. I think it would be useful for you, if you would, please, to read pages 114 all the way through the end of the reading material, which is page 138 in the back of the notebook. Just go ahead and read pages 114 to page 138 in the back of the notebook before we proceed. So if you haven't done that yet, why don't you pause the program here and just go ahead and read that and then come back when you've read it. All right, welcome back. And now here's the question. Why in the world would you want to learn how to elicit strategies or even to work with them? In fact, that's a really good question. Strategies are an extremely powerful part of NLP, and the reason is because all of our behavior, everything we do is involved with strategies. Actually, strategies involve everything we do. All of our day activity is generated and maintained by strategies, and whether or not we finish what we do or whether we begin what we do or just get into it, all of that is related to a strategy. We have strategies for love and hate, for learning, forgetting, for parenting, for sports, for communication, for decision-making, for motivation, for happiness, for sex, for reassurance, for eating, for health, for disease, for creativity, relaxation, tension, fun, boredom, marketing, wealth, depression, and poverty. Actually, everything we do is related to strategies. Now that's good in a way, because if we find a good strategy, we can adopt it. That's also important because if we find a behavior we don't want anymore, we can get rid of it by simply taking out the strategy. Are there any behaviors that you've got that you'd like to get rid of? Think about that for a moment. Are there any behaviors that you've got that you'd like to get rid of that don't serve you? Behaviors that you aren't particularly happy with? Well, strategies are the key. Now, are there also, how would you like to be able to talk to someone and communicate with them so that their message, your message, would get through regardless of the content of the message? That would be useful too, wouldn't it? Remember I told you about going down to Washington, D.C. and working with those native guys when we talked about rapport and how the chief and our Auditory digital Don sat there and he talked? Well, one of the things that was my job was to look at the head Bureau of Indian Affairs guy and to pick up his strategies and to use his strategies and utilize them to assist him in making the right decision, the decision that would actually support them in making the loan to these native people that I was working with. Well, so I asked him, as we were sort of finishing up, we just sort of finished up and Don had finished his first presentation. We were talking to the head guy at the BIA who was in charge of the loans. And I said to him, just as we were walking out the door, I said, you know, sir, how is it that you ever decided to get into government? You've been in your job 20 years. He told us he'd been in his job 20 years. I said, you've been in your job 20 years, and it must be something you really like. Do you remember how you decided that? And he said, well, I don't know. He said, I just did. And as he did, he moved his eyes back and forth across the top. He said, I don't know, and then they came down and to my right, as I looked at him, and then across to the bottom left. He went down into my right, down at the very bottom, and then across to the bottom left at the end, and after going back and forth across the top. And I looked at him, and what I read VC, VR, AD, K. And I asked him again, I said, but what do you mean you just got into it? This is something you really, really love. Did you just happen to fall into it or what? He said, I don't know. He said, I just decided to do it. And he moved his eyes in exactly the same way. Well, 2 times is a pattern. So as we were leaving, I said to him, and this is in the back of the strategy section you just read, I said, I'm wondering how soon you'll have the opportunity to look at our proposal, to see that it meets your criteria for acceptance so that you can feel good about it tonight, won't you? And as I did that, I swear each time I saw just a little micro muscle movement of his head move backwards each time I said one of the predicates. Just a minor micro muscle movement, indicating to me that his unconscious mind was fully taking in every single suggestion I made to him. Well, the next day we came back, and lo and behold, he'd read the strategy, he'd read the proposal, and he loved it. He'd read the entire strategy for creating the thing that the natives wanted to create up there, and he just loved it. And one of the telling things was his assistant said to me, he said, you know, Ted, he said, I've been with this guy for about 15 years, and I've never seen him so excited about anything in government before. And he said, you guys don't seem to have anything special. You know, what's up? And I said, well, we're just a bunch of nice guys from Alaska. But I would credit rapport and strategies with being able to do that. And I would say anytime you're negotiating with someone or anytime you're in a selling situation, in addition, strategies are useful when you're working with clients to assist them in improving their ability to get motivated, their ability to make decisions, and also in relationship counseling. And we're going to talk about all of that as we move into this particular program. So everything we do is controlled by strategies. And we can even take out a strategy that isn't working. And we'll talk a little bit about how to do that. So that's what strategies are about. And they're very, very exciting. They're very exciting and they're fun to do. And they're pretty easy to do because all you have to do is simply watch and pay attention to what the client's doing. And you'll notice what the client's doing with his eyes, with his physiology, with his breathing, and that'll give you a lot of information. Now, there are certain things that each client does or each person does inside their heads, and these are the things we're going to pay attention to and attempt to note down as elements of the strategy. So let's find out what the different elements are of the strategy. What is the client doing inside his or her head? What are all the various possible things that we could have in a strategy? And let me give you some examples of it while I do it. So let's look at page 54. The major components of a strategy are going to be the elements of the strategy and the sequence in which they occur. Now, the different elements include visual, auditory, auditory digital, kinesthetic, olfactory, and gustatory. And those are the italicized words there with the bullets on the outside. Now, let's look and see what each of the components could be, and let me give you an example. So visual external could be seeing something outside yourself, and visual internal could be a picture inside of your head. An internal picture could either be constructed or remembered. So a constructed picture is seeing something of something that you're not necessarily remembering, perhaps even something you've never seen before. Or it could be imagining yourself as someone that you're not, or it could even be imagining something silly. Like, for example, can you remember a time, maybe a long time ago, when you saw an animal, just an animal, a certain animal you saw? Now imagine that animal with another animal's head on its body. Now that's an internal constructed rather than a remembered. You're probably going to remember each element separately, but you'll construct them separately, and your eyes probably went to a different place for that. For auditory, we've got internal and external, and constructed and remembered. Auditory external, obviously, is hearing something outside yourself. Auditory internal is something inside yourself. Auditory external might be something outside like the phone ringing, and auditory internal might be remembering the phone ringing, or making up a sound that you hadn't heard before, like a telephone that sounded like a buzzsaw. You know, something like that. Okay, then there's auditory digital, which is primarily internal, and generally internal. It's simply your internal dialogue. Then there's kinesthetic, and we can have kinesthetic external and internal. And the kinesthetic internal can be constructed or remembered. Let's talk about that. The kinesthetic external is a feeling necessarily outside yourself, which might mean like touching something. It could be the feelings of the back of your legs against the chair if you're sitting down right now. That would be some sort of kinesthetic external. A kinesthetic internal might be a kinesthetic state, like a happy state or a sad state. That would be a kinesthetic remembered state, or it could be in the moment. It could be constructed, like, can you imagine feeling really, really happy? And then the happiness you feel as you imagine doing that is going to be kinesthetic constructed. Now, proprioceptive is internal feelings and sensations. Those are things that go on inside you. Whereas tactile is the sense of touch. So that would be the sense of touch feeling outside, but you could also remember a tactile feeling. Then there's one other, which is kinesthetic meta. And meta means a feeling about something. So if somebody said to you, how do you feel about that guy? Well, that would be a sort of a kinesthetic meta, and that could be constructed or remembered. So all of those are under kinesthetic. There's actually a lot of stuff that goes on under the kinesthetic representational system there, isn't there? Now there's olfactory, and external olfactory would be like, smelling cookies. And internal would be constructed or remembered, so that would be the remembered smell of cookies. Or the smell of cookies with pizza dough on top, or pizza topping on top. Yeah, so that would be olfactory. And then gustatory is external and internal. And gustatory external, of course, is the sense of taste. Like, what does that candy bar taste like that you're eating right now? That's, of course, gustatory external. And then internal would be in your mind. Even though it's in your mouth, we're going to call it external because it's the sense of taste actually going on at the moment. And then gustatory internal is going to be constructed or remembered. Gustatory remembered would be, the remembered smell of cookies. And gustatory constructed, oh, Tad, you made me hungry now. Oh, well. Gustatory constructed would be like, what would it taste like if you had, put Parmesan cheese on those cookies? For some reason, I'm thinking of pizza. Anyway, those are all the possible elements that go into a strategy, and we want to discover these. We can discover these, by the way, looking at a person. We can discover that paying attention to them. We're gonna watch their eye patterns. We're going to look at everything that we see and everything that we hear. We're going to listen to everything we hear while we're paying attention to a person and eliciting the strategy. But let's get a little more theory first before we go into that. Let's talk a little more theory, and let's talk about the T.O.T.E model of strategies and how the T.O.T.E model actually works. The T.O.T.E model was first formulated in Plans on the Structure of Behavior, published in 1960 by Miller, Galanter, and Pribram, and T.O.T.E stands for Test, Operate, Test, Exit. Or sometimes we call it Trigger, Operate, Test, Exit. And on page 26, if you remember, we also had a trigger for strategies. And we said, can you remember a time when you're totally X'd? Can you remember a specific time? As you remember that time, it was the very first thing that happened. That's going to get the person to the beginning of the strategy. And that's going to be a trigger. So the first test, where it says set or access the criteria for the desired state underneath the diagram there, the first test is a cue or a trigger that begins the strategy, and it establishes the criteria which are going to be fed forward and used as a standard for the second test. Now the operate or the operation part is where we access data by remembering or creating or gathering information required by the strategy, either internally or externally. The operation part is what we usually talk about as a strategy in NLP. So in NLP, we talk about a strategy, and the operate part is usually the part that we're dealing with when in NLP we say strategy. And that's where we access or gather the data. Now the second test of test, operate, test is a comparison of some aspect of the access data with the criteria that have been established by the first test. And the two things compared are generally represented in the same representational system. That's usually useful. So there's some kind of aspect of the access data that's compared somehow in the second test. And then there's an exit, a decision point or a choice point, which is a representation of the results of the test. If there's a positive exit, then the strategy exit, and if there's not a positive exit or a mismatch, then the entire strategy can recycle. The strategy can recycle by changing the outcome or redirecting itself. It can adjust the criteria, it can chunk laterally, or reorient itself, or it can refine or further specify the outcome, or it can access more data. Now, in order to talk about strategies in a useful way, I think we should first talk about eliciting strategies. And on page 56 at the bottom, below the structural well-formedness conditions for strategies and the functional well-formedness conditions, there are questions to elicit strategies. These are some questions you could use to elicit strategies in terms of the test, operate, test, and exit. The first question you could say is, what let you know it was time to decide, and when did you begin deciding? This is, of course, obviously for a decision-making strategy. How did you know it was time to decide? The operate would be, how did you know there were alternatives? How do you generate alternatives? How do you evaluate alternatives? What has to be satisfied in order for you to decide? And how do you select which alternative to take, and how do you know, or what lets you know that you've decided? Now, if you look at page 64, 56, 57, 58, 59 through 63 are all about well-formative conditions for strategies, and we're going to come back and look at those right after we look at how to elicit strategies. And page 64 is NLP notation. You might want to take a look at that to learn how to notate your strategy, just so it's pretty consistent with the rest of the folks in the field. And I'll be using this notation at the training, as well as you may have noticed I've already used it in the notes you read last night. All right, so let's go on and look at page 65 now and talk about how do you discover a strategy? How do you actually discover what a strategy is, and where does it begin and where does it end? I think probably the most important thing to discover where a strategy begins and ends, and that's all has to do with chunking. For example, if I were going to buy something, would I use one strategy for that? Think about it for a moment. If I was going to buy something, would I simply use one strategy? Well, probably not. Let me give you an example now. Let's just say for a moment that I were going to buy a car. I don't know if you know this, but there's years and years of historical research that the car dealers have done. And most people, when they buy a car, they get motivated to buy a car 6 months before they actually show up on the showroom floor. Now, here's how it works. You'll be driving along in your car, and your present car is just fine, and you're driving along, and you don't see any other cars, except maybe you see the same kind of car you're driving. But you drive along, and all of a sudden one day you wake up and you go, whoa, what was that? And you see another kind of car. Or maybe you begin to see, boy, there's a lot of those kinds of cars on the road. And somewhere along the way, you may run your motivation strategy to become motivated, but typically it takes up to 6 months for you to get to the showroom floor and buy a car. Your decision-making strategy for buying the car occurs when you show up on the showroom floor and are choosing among the different kinds of cars that are present there. And all car dealers know that it usually takes a car buyer about 24 to 48 hours to buy a car, which is why most car dealers, by the way, they don't want you to walk. They want you to stay there. And that's why they'll often do a T.O. if you're going to go out and buy a car. And they'll take that and salesperson, and if the salesperson doesn't sell you the car, they'll turn you over to another salesperson. It's called a T.O., and it's called a turnover. And they'll turn you over to another salesperson. And hopefully, and eventually, if you stay there long enough and don't buy, you'll end up talking to the sales manager. Well, that's because they know that you're going to buy a car within 24 to 48 hours, so they don't want you to leave that showroom floor. Okay, now the reassurance strategy occurs sometime after you buy the car. And the reassurance strategy will be something, whatever it is, that tells you that your car purchase was a good purchase. And this is all on page 65. Somewhere along the way of running the decision strategy, the decision to buy, you'll also run a convincer strategy. And the convincer strategy is simply how you become convinced that this car is a good purchase to do. So actually, when we're doing strategy elicitation, we need to make sure we're chunking it specifically enough. We want to be specific enough, but not too specific. And most strategies run through a similar set of sequences. In a buying strategy, as I mentioned before, the first thing that happens is the person's motivated. They haven't bought yet, but they're motivated. Then to get to the decision to buy, the person runs through the internal motivation strategy. And when the motivation strategy ends, the person's motivated, but they're not ready to buy yet. Then they show up and put themselves in the position of making a decision. And the decision-making strategy begins when the person is in the process of making a decision between or among a number of alternatives. You could be motivated for a long time but not buy anything. That's true. And sometimes people get motivated and they don't buy anything. The third part is the convincer, or actually the convincer is part of the decision-making strategy, where you become convinced it's okay to make the decision. And the question is, in this case, how many times do you need to loop through the decision-making strategy until you're convinced it's okay for you to do that? By the way, if you want to read more about the convincer strategy, you might want to read about the convincer metaprogram in the book Timeline Therapy and the Basis of Personality, pages 120 through 122. Okay, then the person buys and the decision-making process ends. And the final part of the strategy is a reassurance strategy. And the question is, how do you know that what you bought was a good purchase? Some people buy after the end of the decision-making strategy when the convincer has been fulfilled, but some people don't actually buy until they are reassured. Some people actually run their reassurance strategy. They decide to buy, pretend they've bought, but they don't actually finish the purchase of buying until they run their reassurance and notice that they're reassured. So that's also possible. If you're a good salesperson, obviously, you'll know that it's important to run the reassurance strategy before the buyer leaves so that there's no buyer's remorse. So those are the three major strategies, and I use these buying strategies on page 65 as an example. And they're simply an example of, because most of us, whatever we do, I mean, think about all the different things you do in life. Whatever you do, probably before you do something, you get motivated. Then you decide to actually do it. And those are probably two different strategies. And as you're deciding, you become convinced it's okay to do it. And then once you've done it, you become reassured that it was okay to have done. I use these buying strategies because, in this order, because they're a pretty good example of how we run most of our strategies. Most of our strategies run in this sequence with three major strategies: the motivation, the decision, and the reassurance. And as an example, right below here, I've included some love strategies. Typically, in getting into a relationship, people first have an attraction strategy, which is very much like the motivation strategy. Then the second thing they do is they recognize the attraction from someone else, and that's kind of like the decision strategy. And then they get together, and then they run a deep love strategy, which is very, very much like the reassurance strategy. Although the deep love strategy has a separate condition, which we'll talk about when we get to love strategies. Typically, the strategy is pretty much the same. So love strategies run through pretty much a motivation, a decision, including the convincer, and a reassurance pattern, a reassurance strategy before or as the person goes through the process of getting into a relationship. So strategies generally tend to end up being very, very similar, although there are other strategies that operate in different ways. And I think each time you elicit a strategy, you ought to be sure, first of all, what it is you're eliciting. If you're unclear about what it is you're eliciting, if you don't make it clear what the elicitation procedure is, or if you're not clear and use words which are fuzzy or different words from what the words we're using here, you may have strategies that have quite different results. Okay, so how do you elicit a strategy? Well, the first thing you do is you look at the person's eye patterns. And the eye patterns are on page 23. Let's look at those for just a moment. If you look at the eye patterns on page 23, and this is, by the way, a normally organized person as you look at them. If you look at the eye patterns on page 23, you'll notice that there's visual construct, visual recall, auditory construct, auditory recall, kinesthetic, and auditory digital. One of the things I would suggest before you actually elicit a strategy with someone is you might want to run an eye tracking test with them. You might want to run an eye tracking test with them, and the way you do that is you simply hold your hand, or two fingers generally, above the person's eyes, directly above the center of their eyebrows, and hold it up high enough so that they have to move their eyes right up to the top of what they're capable of moving without moving their head. So you're going to hold your two fingers in the center and all the way up in the center. And then what you'll do is you'll run your two fingers around the outside, down the outside, down the right side if you want first, and then around that way, all the way over to the left side and then back up. And do it slowly, looking at their eyes, and notice if there's any glitches or if there's any places that the person can't go. The person may have trauma in a certain area, in a certain quadrant. Robert Dilts talks about this in talking about synesthesias. Now, a synesthesia is a two-step strategy. A synesthesia is a two-step strategy. And it's usually a VK synesthesia. For example, I have to see how I feel about that, or I want to get a feel for it before I talk to you. Those are all synesthesias. And synesthesia is simply a two-step strategy, and one of those steps of the strategy may be out of awareness. But notice if your eye patterns or your client's eye patterns have a certain glitch in them, or the client can't go in a certain place, or doesn't easily go into a certain direction, that the eye patterns, the client may not have full access to all of the quadrants. And if they don't have full access to all of the quadrants, that means that some of the eye patterns will be underrepresented or may not even be accessed at all. The eye patterns may be reversed, as I mentioned a couple of times earlier when we were looking at eye patterns under the rapport section. I mentioned the woman who accessed all of her eye patterns on the same side of her head, which was looking away from me. And when I sat on the other side, she shifted to the other side. So all of those are possible when you begin to use eye patterns. As you elicit a strategy with a client, you'll look at their eye patterns and listen to everything that they say. And you'll be paying very, very close attention to everything that they do. Now, when I elicit a strategy, I either like to elicit it formally and go through and ask the client for a specific set of internal representations, making very, very sure that those set of internal representations that I'm clear about and that I have a strategy elicited very well. Or I'll go through and ask a client just sort of off the cuff, hey, I like that watch. Where did you get it? And the client will tell me where they got it. And as they do, I'll say, how did you decide that was the watch for you? I mean, assuming, first of all, that they like the watch and that they bought the watch when they were alone. And I'll say, how did you decide that was the watch for you? Now, what they'll say at that point is they'll give me the story of how they got the watch, but I'll also be watching their eye patterns and their physiology and paying attention to where their eyes move and noting one after the other after the other. It's a little tough to do this on audio tape, but we're going to easily do that, and we'll easily learn it during the practitioner training when you come and take that. You'll come and see, and you'll actually see elicitation of strategies, and you'll actually learn how to do it yourself. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to demonstrate the process of strategy elicitation using the script on page 65, because you can elicit strategies, and you can elicit the strategy using the text for formal strategy elicitation on page 65. In this case, we're going to use the text, and you may not necessarily need to rely on the eye patterns. Obviously, since these are not videotapes, you won't actually see Lori's eye patterns as we do this. So we're simply going to have to rely on what she says about the time when she bought something. Okay, so this time we're going to ask Lori to come over and assist us, and we'll be using the text for formal strategy elicitation, which is on page 65. And we're going to ask her, can you recall a time when you were totally X? Can you remember a specific time? As you go back to that time now, what was the very first thing that caused you to be totally X'd? Was it something you saw, or the way someone looked at you? Was it something you heard, or someone's tone of voice, or was it the touch of someone or something? What was the very first thing that caused you to be totally X'd? And we'll go through that particular script with her, and you get a sense of how that works. Now, Lori's going to share with us a time when what is this now? Is this a purchase?
Yes, it is.
And is this your decision-making strategy?
Yes, it is.
So we'll elicit Lori's decision-making strategy. And what was the object that you bought?
I bought a pair of Guess boots.
Now, this particular pair of boots, are you happy with the purchase?
Yes.
And did you buy this alone?
Yes, I did.
The reason I ask her those two questions is because if she bought them alone, well, actually, if she bought them with someone else, she might use a different strategy. And if she wasn't happy with them, she might have also used a different strategy. Obviously, you don't want to know the strategy that someone used when they bought something they weren't happy with. So you really want to use the strategy that the person used when they bought something that they were totally happy with. Okay, so, Lori, can you remember the time when you bought those boots?
Yes.
Can you remember that time specifically, and can you go back to that time now?
Okay.
What was the very first thing that happened that caused you to know that those were the boots for you? Was it something you saw, something you heard, or the touch of someone or something?
I walked in the store and I saw them and they caught my eye.
You saw them and they caught your eye. Now that's a real interesting way to put it. So after you saw them and they caught your eye, what was the next thing that happened as you knew those were the boots for you? Did you picture something in your mind? Did you say something to yourself, or did you have a certain feeling or emotion? What was the next thing that happened?
Well, I pictured them on my feet and it gave me a good feeling.
Okay, so you pictured them on your feet and it gave you a good feeling. Did you know that those were the boots for you at that point, or did you do something else? Did you say something to yourself? Did you have a certain feeling, or did you have another picture in your mind? What was the next thing that happened as you were as you knew you bought those boots?
Well, right then I knew those were the boots for me, although I had to wait a period of time to be convinced about it.
So you actually knew those were the boots for you, and then you had to run your convincer.
Right.
So how long did that take?
It's different for different purchases, although what I have to do is just get away from them and look at other items, it doesn't matter what, and then come back to them.
How many other items did you actually look at?
I went to 2 to 3 other stores looking at other things not related to boots.
Not related to boots.
Right.
And when you went to those 2 or 3 other stores, then you came back afterward, yes?
Right.
And then you bought them.
Right.
So then when you came back, did you know those were the boots for you, or was there something else you needed to do first?
Well, when I came back, I checked the price, and the price was right, and then I tried them on, and they feel good, or fit good, and then I bought them.
So then you knew they were the boots for you.
Yes.
Okay, so what do we have here? We have a strategy where she actually popped out in the middle, and it seems to me that this is what her strategy is. Now, this is based on the information we have so far. And thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
It seems to me this is what her strategy is. What we have is we have visual external with a kinesthetic synesthesia. Because whenever someone says to you, I looked at this thing and it caught my eye, to me, that's a kinesthetic synesthesia. So that's going to be a visual external with a kinesthetic synesthesia. And then she imagined trying them on and got a good feeling about it, which is either going to be a full kinesthetic in and of itself or a visual construct with a synesthesia. So what we probably have, if we were going to notate this, is we probably have a V in her eye patterns, and I haven't seen her eye patterns because we're doing this simply from the script. But what we probably have is a VCVR with a kinesthetic synesthesia coming off that. Now at this point, she popped out of the strategy and went somewhere else and came back, but what she ended up with was an auditory digital and a kinesthetic, where she checked the price, and then she said, and they're the right price, and then she tried them on, and they felt good, and then she decided those were the boots for her. So what we have is we have visual external kinesthetic synesthesia, visual construct kinesthetic synesthesia. So we could probably note that as VCVR kinesthetic as a synesthesia, and then AD and then K, with a certain amount of time to think about it as part of her convincer and being convinced to buy. And so we simply ran through the text on page 65 until we were clear that we had the entire strategy and she'd made her decision. Now, one of the things that we should do is we should test it. So we should say to Lori, to test this, we should say, Lori, I want to make a proposal to you, which when you have the opportunity to look at it, and you get a good feeling about it right away, but when you get a chance to look at it and imagine how you can use it, you'll get a really good feeling about it, and then you'll notice that the price is right, so you can really feel good about it. What do you think about that?
That puts a big smile on my face.
Good. So it seems as though when we test it, she's got a big smile on her face. We also notice a nice color shift. And we look at Lori, and we also notice a nice color shift there. So it looks as though we've got our strategy at least pretty close to correct or correct. And so that's what you want to do when you finish eliciting a strategy, is you want to test it. And you want to test it to the extent that you know that the strategy you got is accurate in that it produces a result. The minute you elicit a strategy, I think you probably want to go back and test it and make sure that the strategy you elicited was correct. So we can elicit the motivation strategy in the same way. We can elicit the decision-making strategy in the same way. The convincer strategy, we can elicit the convincer strategy. Now let's just see. She went out and looked for a period of time, and she went out there and walked around and looked at a number of different things, but it probably was a period of time to think about it or get convinced about it. But let's just for a moment ask her a question about her convincer strategy from the Timeline Therapy book. And we'll just simply ask this question about Lori's convincer so that we can find out and just sort of double check our work here. So Lori, how do you become convinced that someone else is good at what they do? Do you have to see them? Can you hear about them? Do you have to do the work with them? How do you become convinced that someone else is good at what they do?
I see them and get a good feeling about it.
Okay. And then how often does someone have to prove competency to you before you're convinced?
2 times, 2 to 3 times.
Okay, so we would say that Lori's convincer is probably 2 to 3 times, which means she had to at least run through, look at 2 to 3 other things, maybe 2 to 3 other shops, and go back and forth. And so we get a sense that while she was out there looking around, that she looked at 2 to 3 other shops probably and got some ideas. So what we would do then is we would present to her at least 2 to 3 different alternatives. For example, if I were, let's say I was selling a house, and Lori's going to decide to buy a house on her own, and I were a real estate salesperson, I think what I would do is knowing that her convincer is 2 to 3, I probably would get 3 houses. And the first house, I'd make sure it wasn't what she wanted. And I'd say to her, this house probably isn't what you want, but wait till we get to the second house. Then I'd show her the second house. And then I'd show her a third house. By the time we got to the third house, I would say, now I think this house will probably be exactly what you want. And I'd say when you look at it, you can probably imagine all the ways you could use it and notice what bedroom's here and where the family room is, and the price is right, and you can get a good feeling about it. And I'd run off her strategy so that she'd have her strategy fired off at the same time, having met her convincer and fulfilling her strategy. And that's essentially how I would use that in the process of eliciting her strategy. Unfortunately, we can't show you how to elicit it from eye patterns, but when you come to the training, you'll get a sense of how that works. So here's what I think you ought to do. I think for the next couple of days, if I were you, I'd go elicit some strategies. Get some friends and really practice their strategies. Practice the strategies with people in their house. Elicit their motivation strategy. The question for eliciting the motivation strategy is, can you remember a time when you were totally motivated? Can you remember a specific time? The decision-making strategy occurs when a person's buying something, usually, if it's a decision to buy. And the reassurance strategy is when you bought that thing that you bought, how did you know it was a good purchase? So those are the areas. And love strategies are very, very similar. If you're going to elicit someone's love strategies, you may want to be concerned about ecology. If you elicit someone's attraction strategy, make sure you're not sitting in their line of sight, or they may attach the attraction strategy to you. Now, that's the only caveat. That's probably a pretty good caveat unless you want to have all of your clients attracted to you, which ultimately probably won't be a good thing. Oh, yes, and one more thing. When you elicit the deep love strategy, let's look at page 66. The deep love strategy works like this. It's one exception to the strategy elicitation series that we've got. And so we're going to say to the client, how do you know someone else loves you? Can you remember a specific time when you were totally loved? And in order to know that you're totally loved, is it necessary for you to be taken places and bought things, or to be looked at with that special look, or to hear that special tone of voice or those special words? Or is it necessary that you're touched in a certain way or in a certain place? Obviously, on page 66, number 3A is visual, 3B is auditory, and 3C is kinesthetic. For a person to know they're totally loved, it's usually going to be one of those, and some people might say, oh, I want all three of them. Then you need to do the takeaway. So if you could be taken places and bought things, but not hear that special tone of voice, would that be okay? Or if you could be touched in a certain way, but not hear that special tone of voice, would that be okay? And you need to get it down to very specifically the one thing that falls into their deep love strategy. And that's how to elicit the deep love strategy. Let me demonstrate this now, and we're going to ask Lori to come back. Thank you for joining us again, Lori.
Thank you for having me.
And the question is, how do you know that someone else loves you? You don't really need to wait for an answer on this one. You just go right on. So can you remember a time when you felt totally loved by someone else?
Yes.
Can you remember a specific time?
Yes.
In order for you to know that you're totally loved, is it necessary for you to be taken places and bought things, or to be looked at with that special look? Or is it necessary that you hear that special tone of voice or those special words? Or is it necessary that you're touched in a certain way or in a certain place?
Okay, touched in a certain way and in a certain place, and hearing words in a special tone of voice.
Now, oftentimes you'll get two of them, or sometimes you'll get three of them. With some clients, I've had some clients say, well, all three of these are absolutely important to me. At that point, you have to find out which one is the most important, in which case you'll do the takeaway. So what we'll say to Lori is, so if you could hear that special tone of voice or those special words, but not be touched in that special way or in a certain place, would that be okay?
No.
And if you were touched in a certain way or in that special place, or you didn't hear that tone of voice, would that be okay?
That's better. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, good. So now we know that Lori's deep love strategy is simply kinesthetic, and the output of this particular strategy elicitation is either visual or auditory or kinesthetic. Sometimes clients will give you a couple of different things, and you want to single it down to one. Here's the thing about deep love strategies. Oftentimes when we get together with someone, we do all of them. We do all visual. We take people places and we buy them things. We buy them flowers, or we take them places. We look at them with that certain look. We talk to them in that special tone of voice. We say those special words, and we touch them in a certain way, and we touch them in a certain place. But after some time, we usually fall back onto our own way of doing things. When we fall back into our own way of doing things, it usually is our own deep love strategy. So it's useful to know the person you're with. It's useful to know their deep love strategy so that that can be fulfilled. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. We're going to have one of the programs that we talk about will be on couple counseling, and we'll talk more specifically about that then. So I would elicit strategies if I were you. I would elicit strategies from some people and get a chance to experience how this works. It's really a lot of fun, and you can get a lot of valuable information. When we were doing business consulting, I'll tell you what we did. When we were doing business consulting, we had a list of all of the people, all of the clients that we had, and I had a list of all the people that worked for me. And what we would do is we'd send a consultant out and we'd elicit the client's motivation strategy, their decision-making strategy, and their reassurance strategy. So that if we ever had to talk to them on the phone or not in person, or if someone else ever had to take over the client for a week when, let's say, the consultant went on vacation or something, that we would know exactly how to motivate them and exactly everything we needed to do, everything we needed to say to have the client continue to have the same motivation and the same rapport that we had. We would also elicit their values and their meta programs, which we'll show you how to do during the Master Practitioner training. But we would have all that information available to us, and I'll tell you what, I really felt to me like it allowed us to serve our clients a lot better. Knowing their strategies and knowing the way they made decisions, knowing how they got motivated, knowing how they got reassured that what they were doing was correct, all of that, I think our knowing that really helped each of our consultants to serve our clients in a far more effective way, and it allowed us to be better consultants to them. What we found after NLP was it actually increased the length of time our clients would stay with us, and all because we knew them better. And among other things, it was that decision-making, the reassurance, and the motivation strategies that we knew. Oh, by the way, if you have trouble sorting out whether or not you're talking about auditory tonal or auditory digital, let's look at slide number 68 on page 12 in the slide section. Auditory digital is usually your own voice, and it probably relates to criteria and or price or values. Auditory tonal is often someone else's voice, such as your mom's or someone else that the person's remembering. So given that, if you're asking questions, you can always sort that out pretty easily. Oh, by the way, Lori's decision-making strategy is notated here on page 70, and I think probably it would be a good idea just to give you an example of going on and eliciting a motivation strategy and a reassurance strategy, just so that you have an example of all three of these having been elicited. So we're going to go back now to page 65 in the strategy section, strategy elicitation, and I'm going to elicit Lori's motivation strategy now. So Lori, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you.
And I wonder if you can recall a time when you were totally motivated. Can you remember a specific time?
Yes.
And as you go back to that time now, what was the very first thing that happened that caused you to know you were totally motivated? Was it something you saw, something you heard, or the touch of someone or something? What was the very first thing that caused you to be totally motivated?
A picture and a feeling.
So you had a picture, and then you had a feeling right after that.
Right.
And after you had the picture and the feeling, what was the next thing that happened as you were totally motivated? Did you say something to yourself? Did you have a certain feeling or emotion, or did you make another picture?
I said something to myself.
And what did you say?
Oh boy.
Okay. And then, so you said, oh boy. And then after you said, oh boy, what was the next thing that happened as you were totally motivated? Did you picture something in your mind, or did you have a certain feeling or emotion?
I had a feeling, and I said, that's exciting.
You had a feeling, then you said, that's exciting, and then were you totally motivated?
Yes.
Okay. So you had a feeling, and you said, that's excited. So let's see if we can notate that now. So the first thing that happened was she had a picture and a feeling, and that's not a surprise because we find that VK synesthesia happening also with her decision-making strategy. Then she said, oh boy. And that would be either, now see, we don't know if this is auditory digital or auditory tonal, so we'll put auditory, and underneath we'll put, oh boy. And then she had a feeling, and then she said, that's exciting. That's exciting. And then she knew she was totally motivated. Okay, so let's go back and test this now and check this out and see, and let's just make sure that we've got it in order. So you saw something. Can you go back to that time once again? Just go right back to that time now. Float down into your body, see what you saw, hear what you heard, and feel the feelings of being totally motivated. And so you saw something.
Yes.
And then right then and there you had a feeling.
Right.
At the moment. And then you said, oh boy.
Right.
Can you say oh boy for me the way you said it?
Well, now that I think back on it, it has a lot of like inspirational words like oh boy, and that sure is exciting. And with that, I get a connected kinesthetic to it.
So there's a kinesthetic at the same time, or right after that?
At the same time.
At the same time. Okay, so there's a kinesthetic at the same time. And then what happens? Are you motivated at that point?
Yes.
So you're motivated at that point?
Yes.
Okay, so it's kind of, oh boy, that's exciting, that kind of, all at once?
Right.
Okay, so what we've got then is we've got a visual, and you get a feeling immediately, and then you say, oh boy, and have a feeling, and then you say, that's exciting, and have a feeling, and then you're done. Okay, so first, let's clarify some of these things. So the picture you saw, first of all, that's inside your head or outside your head?
It's inside my head.
Okay, and then you had a synesthesia with a feeling, and then you said, oh boy, and we need to determine whether that's auditory digital or auditory tonal. So tell me about what you said to yourself.
Well, it's like I'm having a conversation inside my head, but the tone of voice is the most important thing. It's very upbeat and exciting.
So that's auditory tonal then. So what we've got is a VK synesthesia, visual internal, kinesthetic, and then auditory tonal, and you say, oh boy, and that's exciting, and then you finally have a feeling.
Right, the feeling.
And then you're motivated.
And then I'm motivated.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, so what I would say is that the strategy then that we just elicited would be a VK synesthesia, and that's not unusual because Lori does a lot with VK synesthesias, and then auditory tonal, and then into kinesthetic, and she loops around from the kinesthetic to the auditory tonal until the motivation is enough, and then she ends up being motivated. Excellent. Okay, so Lori, can we ask you to do one more strategy with us, if we could? Would that be all right?
Sure.
You've got time?
Yes, I do.
Okay, very good. So let's ask you a reassurance strategy. Now, can you remember a time when you purchased something, perhaps even recently, when you purchased something and you became reassured that it was a good purchase?
Okay, it's a blue sweater I bought.
A blue sweater. Okay, so how did you become reassured after you bought the blue? Can you remember when you bought the blue sweater and then you wore it? When and how did you become reassured that that was a really good purchase? Well, first of all, was it something you saw or something you heard or the touch of someone or something that began that?
It was a picture, an external picture.
So you saw something externally, and then after you saw that, what was the very next thing that happened that you became reassured? Did you picture something in your mind? Did you say something to yourself, or did you have a certain feeling or emotion?
Somebody outside myself said something about it.
Okay, so then somebody said something, and then what happened next?
And then I got a feeling.
Then you got a feeling. So you had a picture, you saw a picture outside yourself, then someone outside you said something, and then you had a feeling inside.
Yes, that's it.
And so let's check on the visual. So that's just simply a visual external, auditory, tonal, and then into kinesthetic for your reassurance.
Yes.
Right. Okay, and then you became reassured.
Right.
Okay, so that's a pretty simple reassurance strategy. Now, if we wanted to, we could go even further. So let me just go one step further with this. We could actually get information about the submodalities, and we're going to do this simply with the reassurance strategy that we just got. So can you stay in that state for just a moment, Lori? And we're going to just go down and get the submodalities of this picture. So the visual external, the thing you saw externally, what was important about that? What was the most, what do you remember most about what you saw?
The color?
So the color was most important to you?
Yes. Yes.
And what was the color?
Blue?
So that was the blue sweater that you saw. Did you see a picture of yourself?
Yes, I saw a picture of myself with the whole outfit assembled.
Oh, I see. So you saw a picture of yourself. Oh, in the mirror.
In the mirror.
So you saw a picture of yourself in the mirror,
Yes.
and it was the blue color that struck your eye the most.
Right.
And do you like that color blue?
I love that color blue.
So it was the color, something about the color. And then someone said something.
Yes.
And what did they say?
Gee, that sure looks nice.
Now, was it the tone of voice or was it the content of what they said that was more important?
It was the tone of voice.
So it's auditory tonal again. And we assumed it was auditory tonal, but we didn't check on it. So how did they say? What was their tone of voice? What did it sound like?
They said, "Oh, wow."
So, oh, wow.
Right, right.
Like that?
Yes.
Is that it? Oh, that is it. Nice color change. That's really good. And then you got a feeling.
Yes.
And the feeling was that it was a really good purchase.
Yes.
So you see, we went even further just now, and we elicited some of the submodalities of that. We got the auditory submodalities of the auditory tonal, and we got the most important part of the reassurance strategy here, which was the color in this case. Of course, that might change based on different things, but again, if she bought a car and she liked the color of the car, it might actually be the same thing. Okay. Oh, the color and the shape, actually.
Right, the color and the shape, actually, now that I think about it.
Very good. Okay, thanks, Lori. Thanks for assisting us on that one. I appreciate it. So those are some examples of strategy elicitation using the script. Unfortunately, of course, we couldn't see your eye patterns, and since you guys couldn't see them listening to the tape, I also avoided paying attention to them just so that I could be doing it the same way you were. Hopefully you got the same strategy that I got as you elicited or as you listened to what we were saying. If you didn't, then go back and just listen for what she said, because all of the words were there. And if you want to check out the notation of it, look at slide number 70. The decision, the motivation, and the reassurance strategy are all on slide number 70 on page 12 in the slide section in your notebook. So that's the elicitation of strategies and the utilization of strategies. We've demonstrated both of those. I think probably that if you get a chance, go out and elicit some strategies and get them from your friends. The amount of time that you invest in strategy elicitation will well repay you with your ability to be able to elicit strategies and then to feed information back to people in a way which satisfies their strategy regardless of the content of the information. And that's a really, really, really valuable thing to learn. So practice strategies. They're a major part of neuro-linguistic programming. Now, we're only halfway through strategies. We've learned how to elicit them. But I want to talk about now what makes a well-formed strategy and how do you change or install strategies. And that's coming up on program number 11.